going inside the issues of our community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Americans love to recall past immigration. The story of huddled masses welcomed through the gates of Ellis Island between 1892 and 1954 has become central to the nation's identity and mythology. But immigration today has become a heated political debate that seems disconnected from the historic traditions that we celebrate at Ellis Island. Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. Today, an estimated 29 million immigrants live in the United States, the largest number in history. The foreign-born make up a little more than 10% of the nation's total population, and that's distributed very unevenly. If you live in the Southwest, on the East Coast, or in certain large cities like Chicago or Detroit, immigrant presence is significant. In New York City, for example, close to 40% of the population is foreign-born. While in Cincinnati, in the metropolitan area in 2005, the estimate is less than 0.5%. As a result, when issues surrounding immigration burst onto the political scene and into the news, most of us have little first-hand knowledge and no human face for the people being discussed. A new effort entitled Human Stories of Inhuman Treatment attempts to fill that gap. It's a collection of stories of 12 immigrants to Cincinnati. I am joined this morning by two of the people who have created this document. Margaret Singer is the coordinator for community outreach for Casa Hispanic Center. Ms. Singer began working with immigrants over 20 years ago in a Texas refugee camp for Salvadorans and Guatemalans fleeing their civil wars and the repressive violence in their countries. She came to Cincinnati 10 years ago. Nancy Thorsen is a volunteer at Casa who has used her love of writing to put these stories into English. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you.
This is a very interesting document, very simple document. This is not highly published or anything, but it's really the voices directly. Margaret, what are you hoping will be accomplished by this? What's your goal in this?
When we started out, my goal is to make people aware of who the people are that are coming and why they are coming and what they have to do to get here. Because a lot of people have asked me, you know, without being able to have a passport or a visa, how do people get here, Margaret? And so I thought the best thing for me to do would be to start asking people.
And this first set of stories, and you're at the end of this, you say that you hope to be able to tell more stories in the future, maybe about life in Cincinnati. But almost all of this first set of stories focus on that travel, that journey out of wherever they are coming from to America, right? So
yes.
That's really the focus?
Yes.
And for you, Nancy, did you have any background with immigrants? Did you have any familiarity before you started working on this project?
Actually, none at all. I met Margaret in early 2006, and until late 2005, I had never met a Latino or a Hispanic immigrant. But during that year, a couple of things were happening. I was taking a Just Faith course with my husband through Bellarmine Parish, his parish, and also I was working as a GED coach at an Even Start program where there were also immigrants, most of whom were Latino, who were trying to learn English, and a very good bilingual teacher was in that same classroom with me. That was my first experience with immigrants.
I think one of the things, and what comes through in this is that it's not just people from Mexico, but you focus also on immigrants from El Salvador and Guatemala. And Spanish is not necessarily the first language of everybody who's coming, and I think it's hard for us to remember that sometimes. We think, oh well, it's all about Spanish and learning English from Spanish, but that's not the case, right? There are other native languages being spoken.
Especially from Guatemala, people from Guatemala. There's a number of indigenous groups in Guatemala, and these are the people who are the majority of the people from Guatemala are indigenous.
Rather than, of Spanish background.
Right.
That whole question of leaving home, it's an ancient question. It's certainly a question at the core of the American experience. And Nancy, if you would just read perhaps a passage. By the way, all of the names you have masked. These are not people's real names for their own protection. But on this question about leaving, there's a woman whose name, is it pronounced Naomi?
No. Nohemi?
Nohemi?
Noemi.
Noemi. And her husband has been injured in an accident. He can't work, so she's decided she has to go to the United States to work. And when she gets here, she calls home and she describes that telephone call. Nancy, would you read that?
Okay. Noemi was in Cincinnati, obviously, when she called. This is a direct quote. "I called home and I spoke to my children and husband. They told me they loved me. They told me I needed to start working and to send money home. The children were going to begin registering for school."
Why do people come here? I mean, that's sort of getting, and that quote just jumped off the page. Why do people come?
That's exactly the reason. We're talking about education. We're talking about people who, a husband had his wife was sick with some kind of illness, severe illness. He came here, he wanted to send money home to her so she could go to the hospital. It's like one basic need like that after another. That's why people are coming.
It is for a better chance, a better economic opportunity to find a job that paid enough, right?
Yes.
And
jobs.
from a historical point of view, that's always, we can talk about democracy and the promise of democracy, but for generations it has been the chance, America's promise of a better life, and sending money back. And there's also a number of quotes in here from people about the pain of leaving home, that these sound, again, they echo through American history. Nancy, would you read, this is a man by the name of Daniel, or identified as Daniel, from Guatemala.
Excuse me. "I had to say goodbye to my wife and daughter. I realized this was going to be the first extremely painful moment. I would have tears began rolling and my heart was torn apart."
There are lots of these little snippets that you get an insight into, that problem of leaving. Nancy, as you talked with people, if you've gotten to know people, this idea, I think this sense of coming to America, gee, we all love America, it must seem like a wonderful place, but when you're leaving behind so much, it can be really difficult. What have you learned about that initial painful experience, as Daniel describes it?
Well, I guess what I have learned from these stories, putting together these stories, which were taken from, excuse me, Margaret's notes when she talked with them and listened to their stories, is that there has to be a reason there has to be some desperation on the part of the individual to leave their home country. I don't think most of them want to leave home, but there is a strong need within their family, whether it's economic, whether it's medical. There's a strong reason that they need to make money somewhere else because they're not able to make it in their home country.
Margaret, a lot of the stories in this volume focus on the trip, the journey.
Yes.
And it struck me as I read these, because there's all sorts of the hardships of the desert and the lack of water, the lack of food, the exploitation by the guides, the coyotes, all of this. It struck me that this is the same image that we have used historically to talk about the journey across the oceans, and how long it took, and people getting seasick and dying en route. And this has just become, this is the new image of, it's no longer across the oceans, it's across the desert. We'll talk about some of the real, if there are some concrete stories that talk about the pain of that journey for you.
I think a couple of the best stories are the stories of immigrant women coming. And one of the stories of a woman who came after her husband had been here a couple of years. She decided to come, and she said, she never thought it would be so hard. She just really believed it would not be this hard.
To get here.
To get here, yes. And when she went to the desert, the immigration, first on the Mexican side of the border, had stopped her, even though after she had walked through the desert area for 4 days, they stopped her 4 different times and took her back. Third time, it's the first, second, third time they took her back just right there on the border. But the fourth time, they took her all the way back to Guatemala, when they finally decided that she is actually Guatemalan instead of Mexican. And then she decided agonizingly to make the trip one more time. And she made that trip the last time, and she said, you know, if I would have known what I had to go through before I went, I would have never left.
Except the stories over and over again in here are people who do get turned back. I mean, people who think we're not guarding our borders or that the Mexicans aren't helping. It's not true at all. People are turned back, but they come back. The drive to get here, the drive to change their conditions is so strong. They just turn around and try again 3 days later or 4 days later. So I mean, that's that sort of impulse to get here. What about this question of a lot of people say that we accuse immigrants of not learning English. You know, one of the things that struck me, because there was a man who talks about wanting to learn English and teaching his wife English. These are people who have very little schooling. Learning a foreign language is not easy.
No, not at all.
And they want to. We're just about out of time, so I want to end with 2 quotes here. Jeremiah from El Salvador says, "God took care of me and brought me to my destiny. This begins the American dream. Now I am in Ohio. I thank God." And Elizabeth from El Salvador said, "Now I am here in the United States, but I really miss my children." Seems to me those are the 2. These are human stories of inhuman treatment, and thank you very much for doing this. We look forward to it, and people can get this at Casa. And stay tuned. After the break, I'll be joined by one of the great wildlife artists of his generation, a man who's called the modern James Audubon. Welcome back. 5 weeks ago, I devoted a segment of the program to the life and work of local wildlife artist Charley Harper, who died in June. Harper's minimalist style reduced the natural world to its essence, while his essential optimism and sense of humor infused everything with a wonder and joy. I hope that Charley's close friend, John Ruthven, would be able to join us for the show that we shot then, but at the last moment, something came up. So this morning, I am very pleased to be joined by John Ruthven, the leading citizen of Georgetown, Ohio, who is world famous in his own right for his wildlife art, which has never been confused with his good friend Charley Harper's art. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you, Dan. I've been looking very much forward to this because Charley was such a dear friend and a long associate of both of ours, and so this is a great opportunity, a wonderful thing.
And you and Charley went back to art school together, am I right?
We did. We went to the Art Academy together. We were both discharged in 1946, and we were there on the GI Bill, and we met at that time.
And at that point, as young art students, did you know and did he know that wildlife art was sort of what your passion was?
You know, in those days, there's a starving artist period in every artist's life. Mine was definitely then, and so I would draw anything that came into the studio, but my passion was always wildlife. And I assume that Charley's was the same because he was considered the finest student in the school at the time. And you know, he won that wonderful award. I don't recall what the name of it right now, but we were all looked up to Charley. And I don't know at that time whether or not he was oriented toward wildlife or not.
Now, I want to throw in too that a fellow student at that time was the woman who ultimately became his wife,
I know it, Edie. Absolutely, I knew Edie there.
And I'm setting that up because of something I'm going to remind people of with at the art museum that's coming up. So, so you were students there. Now let me take a look. I'm going to show a couple of images here.
Okay.
One of Charley's and then one of yours. Okay. Here's one of a cardinal in winter in a bird bath. And this is a Charley Harper. When you look at that, what do you see?
Well, I see a lot of things. First of all, I see the ability of Charley's to convey his very simple, wonderful form. And I see, of course, the cardinal looking straight at you, and he's in this bird bath.
Now let's take a look at a John Ruthven of some cardinals. Now, what, as you look at this, now obviously this is yours, what is the immediate difference here?
Well, you know, Charley and I used to kid around. He always said he likes to paint, when he paints a bird, he likes to paint wings, and I paint feathers. And I see the real bird there, but there's a simpatico about our design, because Charley was fundamentally a designer as well as a great naturalist. But I've got a bird bath that's gigantic. This is the Probasco Monument in Clifton, and of course he had the same theme in that one.
Now, you and DeVere Burt used that same phrase to distinguish the two of you. Yeah. But your assistant sent me something that you did recently. I asked her to send me something that sort of reflected your recent interest. It's an eagle, and a harpy, is that what it is? I'd like to put that up.
A New Guinea harpy eagle.
Yeah. Now is this, well, it'll come up, here it is. This is an incredibly striking bird and striking pose that you have this.
Oh, thank you, Dan. Well, this is a bird native to New Guinea, and it's one of the largest forest eagles in the world, and it feeds primarily on subjects that are in the jungles that it inhabits, and this happens to be the birds of paradise. And so I wanted to get that full sweep of all the wings and the beauty of each bird, and that's a very large painting. It's about 5 feet tall and 4 feet wide.
And when something is that big, it's not just a feather, but you can get into the individual feathers, right?
Oh, I do. I've been accused of counting feathers, like I said before, and trying to bridge the gap between being a visual artist and not making it a photograph. I want to be exact when I'm doing these things. And so I do count the feathers, the main feathers and the wings, but of course not the body feathers. And occasionally people have called me and said, John, you don't have the right number of primaries in your wing. And so I say, really? And I go look. It only happened once, but I never forgot it. And it was about a 9-year-old girl that was counting feathers. It was
really?
It happened in an exhibit that I was having at VLNA in Chicago years ago, but I always remembered that.
I had a third grader, she didn't realize who I was, there was no reason to, at the museum the other day, quote my book from 1982 at me. And I started to say, well, I don't know if that's exactly right. And I said, what book was that coming from? And then she told me. And so it's that same sort of thing. It's yeah, you want to be, you
got to be accurate, yeah.
One of the things that I know you are fascinated by right now, and the world is fascinated by, is the possibility of the ivory bill woodpecker.
Oh, definitely.
And when DeVere was on, we had the museum was able to bring over an ivory bill, and I want to show again. It was one of our specimens from the museum. This is from the other day, 5 weeks ago. And what are you doing right now to rediscover the ivory bill?
Well, I'm still on this select group of hunters, so to speak, that was started by Gail Norton, the Secretary of the Interior. There were 15 of us, and I've been on the hunt now ever since '04. And I've made 4 expeditions into the swamps of the South looking for this bird. I know it's there, Dan. And I do know it's there.
You know it's there because you've seen it?
No, I have not seen it.
You have not seen it.
But I've seen its tracks. I've seen where it eats and how it forages. And no other bird could do what I saw, and we photographed it. But we haven't been able to photograph the bird. Now, a close associate, who's the director of ornithology at one of the great universities in the South, he has seen the bird 4 times. And I looked him in the eye. I felt like I was looking in John James Audubon's eyes, because he saw many. And I said, did you actually see that bird? He said, John, I'm an ornithologist. I know what I was looking at. I saw it. Huh. So, and why didn't you photograph it? And it's like trying to photograph a vision, a zephyr. Boom, it's here, boom, it's gone. And you're not ready in this giant jungle.
Here is your treatment of the ivory-billed woodpecker. And you were able to work from specimens like the one at the...
Yes, maybe that very one. They look like something out of King Tut's tomb. You know, they've been made so long ago, but they're invaluable. But the body is still there, the feathers are still there, and I was able to glean the exactness of the feather patterns. And I wanted to show this, the back view of the male. The male is the only one with the red top knot, and the female has the black, but they have a different pattern from the underside as to the backside.
So the underside of the wing as well as the backside of the wing.
That's where I planned that, say.
Okay.
And I took very close-up pictures of the tupelo and cypress in the background. And the area we're hunting in now is in northern Florida, along the Choctawhatchee River. Try to say that 10 times. And but this is 64 square miles of swampland. And it was logged off in 1900, but they didn't take all the trees, fortunately. They only took the best, but they left some great thousands of 2,000-year-old trees are still there. Those old cypress. And this is the haunt of the bird. And it's changed its lifestyles. It's become a more solitary bird. And it's still gigantic, a 32-inch wingspread. Can you imagine?
So that was fascinating to you as someone who loves nature, who loves birds, that it is such a giant bird, it's such a distinctive bird?
It is so beautiful. And when I say to friends I take, like with DeVere, I said, now DeVere, neither one of us have seen this, but I said, if you see a skunk in a tree, that's an ivory-bill. Now, pileated is the only other big woodpecker, but he looks black. He looks like a crow in the tree. Because of this white and black pattern that you saw in my drawing. That's the terminology I look.
This is Charley Harper's.
Charley's. Oh,
this is Charley's.
I haven't seen that. That is so good.
And it's very different than yours.
Oh, I know, but it's the bird. Boy, I'd dearly love to have that.
And what DeVere pointed out was he had it in the perfect situation on a tree that is decaying, that, you know, the bird is working the tree, and so let me ask you another question here. The ivory bill still exists, you insist.
Yes.
But many species do not exist.
That's right.
And the only way that anybody, whether it's you as an artist or a scientist, can get at this is by looking at collections, specimens in collections. One of those birds, and I want to put up the Carolina parakeet, and this is your rendering of the Carolina parakeet, is a beautiful bird that used to fill the skies.
Did.
And whoops, that's the loons.
That's the loon.
Let's go.
You're a good bird watcher.
It's all you got. Apparently I didn't put the parakeet in, but anyway.
I can describe it though.
Yeah, but you know, was it a, when you try to paint a bird that no longer exists, is there an extra thing, is there something else you're trying to convey to the viewer?
Well, I try to convey as much of history as I can in that painting, and I have to learn about that. And not being able to see the bird in life, I depend on the writings and the paintings of my predecessors, like John James Audubon. Not only was a fantastic painter, he was a voracious writer, and he wrote in great depth about the details of these birds, what color the eyelids were, and the tongue. Now try to find in a reference book about discussing the tongues of birds. He does that type of thing. So what I do, when I do a Carolina parakeet, I go back to my predecessors and I read all about it. Then I go to the museum and get an actual specimen. That's the beauty of our wonderful collection at the Natural History Museum. Our collection, as you know, has over 78,000 species in it. They go back over 100 years. And so I go back and borrow these birds, and so I can intricately pick around on those feathers and make sure of what the colors look like on the inner side of the wing and stuff like this. The eyes are gone, the tongue is gone,
and we're just about out of time, but the point is the collections like that at the Cincinnati Museum Center and Natural History collections are not just, people storing things away. These are of long-term interest to scientists and to artists. It's very important that this work continues.
Extremely important. We're so lucky to have this collection. It's no longer allowed to, you're not allowed to collect birds like this in America today. And all the collections that exist have been collected years ago and have filtered back into the main museums. We're very fortunate to have one of the major collections in this country. It's really a treasure.
Well, we're very fortunate to have you in our community and to have shared the same basic time. And for those of us who, like you, didn't share time with John James Audubon, but we shared times with Charley Harper and John Ruthven, and it's been a great honor. And thank you, and we look forward to your continued work.
Thank you, Dan. I'm busy at work. It was a great pleasure being with you.
That's good. Hopefully, the two segments in the last month that have explored the amazing tradition of local wildlife painting have piqued your interest. If so, next Saturday, well, actually on August the 18th, Cincinnati Art Museum opens an exhibit that will include 40 works of Charley Harper and his wife Edie, both classmates of John Ruthven at Cincinnati Art Academy. The show will run through October the 21st. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning, and join us again next week to meet the women and the men who are depicting our community and shaping it for the future. Have a good week.